Hello everyone, this is Rebecca Dresp, and I'm pleased to introduce you to the Startup Way Chapter 7, which begins Phase 2 and Scaling Up. To begin our presentation, we're going to start with a short video clip from the office.
This week we are rolling out the brand new Sabre tablet, the Pyramid.
Ooh, why is it shaped like that?
So you can tell your clients, unleash the power of the Pyramid.
It's huge. How much does it weigh?
Oh, no. Without the battery pack and the optional memory booster, it's barely 3 pounds.
How much memory does it have without the booster?
50 L.
I'm sorry, L?
Mm-hmm. How many L to a K?
You're really gonna want the booster.
How on earth are we supposed to sell?
I'll take 5.
Phase 2 is all about rapid scaling and deployment of the methods that we learned and identified in Phase 1. This is where the preparation from Phase 1 really pays off. This transition often happens extremely fast, and the key is to be ready for it. While there is no one way to scale up, there are 6 key patterns and tasks from which to follow for success. The common patterns are review and identify the challenges faced by Phase 1 teams and projects. Develop and roll out a widespread system for working in the new way. Identify and make proper use of executive-level champions to reinforce the new methods. Bring internal functions into the transformation process. Create an internal coaching program. Establish growth boards, and begin to use metered funding for resource allocation. This is where we begin to identify the challenges that were faced by the pilot teams. What was completed in Phase 1 now must be systematized. The payoff for allowing teams to fail and succeed is the information that is now available. We will now use this information to integrate into Phase 2. We will draw upon 2 major sources of information that we received in Phase 1. First is the exceptions that we had to make for the project kickoff, and those would include compliance, approvals, and any sponsor interference that had to happen for the kickoff. But the second, and probably the most important, is the results of those early projects. So the successes that we had will become the templates that we're going to use to emulate in the future. But the failures will provide as much, if not more, information to us as well, because we will learn why they failed. But because we have all of this information, it is important to enlist an in-house change agent to monitor, analyze, categorize all of this so that this information does not get wasted. Resistance from within is a major challenge. But really, it is to be expected. I mean, if you think about your current job, when corporate rolls out a new policy or a new procedure that you have to follow, it's almost natural to initially resist the change. But in this instance, a lot of the resistance usually comes from middle management. Middle managers, they have a difficult time with corporate change. They're under constant pressure from above and below, and they're trained to act in a specific way with standardization, elimination of variance, and delivering results. All of this training really conflicts with what we're trying to accomplish here. The key to this is to really take their objections and criticisms seriously, and also to find ways to support their transition rather than hinder it. This is really a great place for executive sponsors and senior leaders to assist.
Part 2, implementing a widespread rollout. Phase 2 is all about taking it to the next level and building a team. This is where you will identify the champion who will take it to the next level and drive the vision. We'll discuss this in more detail in Part 3. In Phase 2, you'll be reviewing the mistakes from Phase 1 and the successes, and developing a plan to scale up the project for go live and, if necessary, rescue the project. When healthcare.gov launched, it was a massive failure and a prime example of how not to launch a project to the public. Phase 2 is where you want to break down the project, define the scope, define the details. You want to identify and create the operating structure. You want to identify the critical processes for internal control and decide what can be outsourced to third parties. And then finally, don't reinvent the wheel. If there's something that you know works, use it. In phase 2, you're going to start small, but you want to have the ability and the flexibility to expand rapidly. Oftentimes, projects fail because they don't have the ability to scale up once people start buying into the idea or buying into the project. Once you start having your success, you'll have more champions. You need to be able to very quickly scale up your project to meet the new needs and the new requirements of that. You do this by utilizing your existing infrastructure and work to eliminate the risk and uncertainty of the existing project or your initial idea. And then, once we launch, you have your success, you want to share that information throughout the organization to help drive momentum. Nothing helps a project grow more than outside people, stakeholders, buying into your idea, buying into your vision. So create your playbook, not just for your team, but for others within the organization, and you'll be able to share your knowledge. And then finally, in the end, if you are successful, be a champion for someone else and their idea or project.
Eric Ries tells us that when innovators are protected from above, they can accomplish great things. This is where adequately leveraging executive-level champions can be vital to team and project success. But first, we need to identify who the executive champions are. Executive champions have the authority and decision-making power to quickly and effectively get your team what it needs. Their whole objective should be to systematically and proactively clear obstacles that get in your team's way. For the best outcome, they need to be able to do this effectively and publicly. In the startup way, Eric Ries tells us a story about a panel discussion at GE where one project could not secure the funding it needed and opened up its presentation for questions. It just so happened the CEO was in the audience. The CEO asked the team to explain in more detail, and after they provided their response, the CEO said, "Okay, I'll authorize the budget you need." The team leader then suggested that they would need to convince finance, and the CEO looked over to the CFO and asked, "Is it okay with you?" "Yes," said the CFO. Now finance was signed up. The CEO asked, "What else do you need?" The team leader said that they needed to transfer an employee over to the team. So the CEO looked over to the head of HR, and there was no objection. Executive championship is key to getting what resources you need and clearing obstacles. Finally, executive champions have the desire to see your team succeed. Sometimes this means going against the normal way of doing work. Rise tells us another story about a team who hit political obstacles, but with the help of executive sponsorship, took the project underground as a skunk works project. The team continued their work alongside their daily responsibilities, as most managers had thought the project had been canceled. By doing this, they can navigate the political uncertainties while still staying within the safeguards designed to mitigate risk. Ultimately, the project became a success. None of it would have been possible if it wasn't for an executive champion who could help solve team problems by exception. Now, I'll pass it over to Ryan, who will talk about training representatives of all internal functions.
Section 4 covers training representatives of all internal functions. So first off, anticipate some backlash, some pushback, and know who you're talking to. Know your audience and tailor that message accordingly. Some internal functions can act as a roadblock for you. So whether it be funding or compliance, those are all issues that can hinder the progress of the project potentially. There may also be some executives who outright don't support the project initially. So the goal is to train those executives across the organization so that everything else will fall into place. Using visibility and transparency, you can get buy-in from all those functions. But the key to doing that is to start out with a question and answer session and address those skepticisms through open two-way communication. And that seems to be the most effective way to address these things initially so that you can gather buy-in from all functions across the organization. So there comes a point at which it's critical to bring in every function of the company. Otherwise, your innovation team won't have the support they need to move forward.
The next section of scaling up is to establish an in-house coaching program. Many of the lean startup principles are major shifts from how people are used to working. Having experienced mentors that lead the team to reach a cultural shift is critical. These individuals are referred to as coaches, mentors, advisors, or even senseis. However, they never take the place of actual leadership. So where do you find these people? Often, they already exist at your company, so take advantage of this pre-existing resource. Paid outside consultants might not always be required. The biggest goal of in-house coaching is to guide the team, not control them. Change will not just happen by telling people what to do. You will have to devise ways for them to believe in the change. Assuming the team is right and then asking them to prove it is a good place to start. For example, when I worked as a process engineer, there were many times that I would have to convince the control board operators to make a certain change. If I had walked in there and just said, "Hi, please raise the reactor temperature by 5 degrees," they would have either ignored me, said okay, but not actually made the change, or told me why they didn't want to do that. But if I would pose the question instead as, what would happen if we did this? Then it opened the door to having a conversation. I would talk through the change I wanted to make and how I thought it would help, and then I asked if they would be willing to try and test it out. It made my job infinitely easier. Having a coach is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. Coaches often have specific skills, and many different types of coaches should be recruited for success. Some examples of these different skill sets are leadership, collaboration, technical, innovation, and business. So how is an in-house coaching program established? While there are many different ways, here are some key points to consider for success. First, make it a real vital position in the organization. This shows how serious you are about it. Second, provide coaches with encouragement and support, as well as devise rigorous training programs for the coaches. You can't have a good coaching program without good coaches. Lastly, make it have easy access. For example, you could offer online portals for people looking for mentors. At the end of the day, the ideal mentor-mentee relationship is actually two-way, meaning both the coach and the mentee learn something in the process.
Lastly, Reese suggests setting up mechanisms of meter funding and growth boards. The traditional way of getting funding is through a process referred to as entitlement funding. Approval for funding through this process is rigorous and time-consuming, but once approved, the money flows regularly, barring no financial constraints to the organization. In this case, there's no recourse for not completing a project on time, so many efforts get delayed. At a previous organization, my department was allocated roughly $3 million per fiscal year to fund data and analytics initiatives. Each year, we would spend over 2 months forming the perfect sales pitch. Myself and another director would present to our executives why we deserved the funding and how the funding would transform the organization's use of data. At the end of the fiscal year, if we did not spend all the money, it would roll over, and we would go back to the CFO and other executives and again explain why we deserved the same amount of money. Between a couple of years, the pitch was very similar. We had not transformed the company, but no one questioned what we did with last year's money. We were entitled to those funds because data and analytics is a strategic priority. Meter funding has a more results-driven structure with a greater focus on validated learning. Metered funding reduces political burden on teams and middle manager interferences. With meter funding, cross-functional teams are held accountable to their validated learning through growth boards. The board sets deadlines for projects and holds the team accountable to their agreed-upon progress. If the board is happy with the validated learning and progress, they will release additional funds. My current organization's department has a more metered-like funding approach. We are funded through 3 distinct capital sources, and those sources make up our governing board. Quarterly, we present a financial and work status update on efforts completed and planned for next quarter. Although a large sum of money has technically already been awarded, the board still votes and approves next quarter's plans based on last quarter's report. We are held accountable for our results. Thanks for listening. We would love to hear your opinions. Please join us on our discussion forum now.